All right, hello everyone. Happy New Year to all. Now you might be thinking that I am filming or uploading this video about 3 months late, even 4 months late. It's almost April here. It is March 27th when I'm filming this video. But I do mean Happy New Year in the old sense of the word. So New Year was not always January 1st, and then even when it was legally and officially considered January 1st, the New Year was often celebrated more commonly around March in the spring. And we're going to talk a little bit about that as we take a nice walk. As you can see, the snow has all melted. We're still not open yet, but you know, we can take a nice walk through the village here without snow, without 2 feet of snow on the ground. So there we go. So if you stop and think for a couple minutes, and you think about what, you know, New Year's is, it really doesn't make sense to have New Year's on January 1st, right? And if you take it out of the context of, well, January is the first month, and you just sort of put all the months together in a blender and you say, okay, where's the beginning? January doesn't really make sense to be the beginning. It's in the middle of a season, right? It's in the middle of winter. It doesn't really have any weight to it, right? You don't really do anything different in January than in, say, February or even, you know, December or something. So there's really no reason to have New Year's in January, except for sort of calendar reasons. But historically, the New Year was not always in January. Even when people used the same calendar that we use today, they didn't see January as the first month. Usually, the first month was March of the New Year. And actual New Year's Day kind of varied. Sometimes it would be somewhere around the 20s in March, sort of marking the New Year, but it was usually March. It was usually almost towards the end of March. Now, why is that, and why does that almost make a little bit more sense than January? Well, if you think about it, March is the beginning of spring, right? Officially, spring begins, I think, the 21st of March or something like that. But March is the beginning of spring, and if you're living in an agrarian system, we think spring is incredibly important just because we can get outside and it's marching towards summer, which we think of as our months off, right? Our vacation months, whereas it was almost the opposite in an agrarian system. Summer is where you did most of your work, and spring is you were preparing for summer, right? You were preparing to do the work of the summer, of your planting, of putting your animals back out to pasture if they had been mostly on hay for the winter, getting ready to shear sheep and things like that. And March was an important month because it was the time, and even a little bit into April, it was the time before everything started. It's still too cold to plant. It would frost at the night, so you couldn't really plant any seeds or anything like that. But it was when you started to get outside and started to work on your farm and started to fix some of the things so that you could be ready for the fall. So you would do maintenance on your equipment and things like that, get your plows out, get your oxen back under the yoke and get them, you know, retrained to do that. I mean, they don't really need to be retrained, but you know, you can walk them around and stuff just so they get stronger again. And also you would be, which was the big thing, you would be fixing fences and fixing rails. Because if anybody has wooden fences or something like that, snow wreaks havoc on those. We're taking pretty much the same path, by the way, as in the snow. So you can see a big change there. Could go down the field, but we'll keep walking up this way and loop around. You know, you would get out, there's a good video there of a nice wagon. You would take out your wagon, like I said in the last video. You would have had sleds mostly and sleighs and things like that over the winter. But in the summer, you'd be getting ready to have all of those things out. You would be fixing rails. You would also be felling trees, or working, I should say, on felled trees. You would fall trees in the December months, or in the winter months, maybe November, October. But you would chop them or split them. You wouldn't use an axe. You would actually use a hammer and wedges to split rails and to split branches up and tree trunks and stuff. But you would do that in the March months, especially. And that's when you would fix your fences. And that's also when you would get your fields not plowed yet. But what you would do is you would take all the rocks out, because the rocks would get pushed up in the winter. So you would put what was called a, I think it's called a rock sled. I can't actually remember the name. I'll flash it up on the screen if I can remember. But you would get that out, and you would basically walk your field with your oxen or your horse and place all of the rocks into that, all of the big rocks, and then you would use those to build fences or foundations or things like that. So that is what the spring was for. And also you would do a lot of things. It is also the maple syrup season, so especially in the north, you would be able to harvest maple syrup from the maple trees, which was your main source of sugar for the season. So nowadays we have sugar cane and all of that, but before, really about 1900, at least in the Americas, and probably even later for some of the more rural areas, the only sugar that you would get was either honey or maple syrup. And syrup only really comes out in the spring months. So they would be preparing the syrup and things like that and mixing it in with all of that. I don't really know where I'm going. There's a nice open field over here. But I don't know if we're going to run into people over this way. But we'll see. So yeah, so those are some of the things that people would have done in the spring. And again, why it was the new year for sort of pre-industrial, pre-modern, right? Like I say in the last video, maybe about 1850, 60. These things start to change about 1880. By like the 1920s, we're approaching a world that kind of resembles ours, at least in terms of things like, you know, New Year's and things like that. The thing is, though, on paper, the New Year might have been January 1st. So, for example, the British Empire made New Year's January 1st, I think by the 1780s, I think. I'm not sure if it was pre-Revolution or not, pre-American Revolution or not. But it might have been either like just before in the 1760s or just after in the 1780s. But either way, you know, on paper, a lot of governments might have said that the new year was January 1st, but that doesn't really mean anything because nothing really changed in January for people who lived on a farm. Right? January was the same as December, was the same as February. You were still sitting inside, you know, waiting for spring, basically. Give me 1 second. Okay, I just wanted to check. There's a nice orchard over here in this direction. I just want to see if anybody was in it working on it, but it doesn't seem like it. So anyway, one last thing. The New Year's Eve drink, right, is a kind of long-established tradition, and now obviously we think of champagne, we think of wine, we think of that sort of thing. But the New Year's Eve drink in, let's say 1860 America would have been honey mead, right, which is a drink that has completely disappeared in the modern world. You know, go walk into any restaurant and ask for honey mead, they'll have no idea what you're talking about. But it's probably the most common drink, at least celebratory drink, alongside cider, which you would have only gotten in the fall. But honey mead is basically a mix of water and honey that's then boiled and sort of reduced down. You can ferment it to make it like an alcohol, but you don't have to. You can just drink it hot after it's been reduced. But that's also where the word honeymoon comes from, right? It would have been honey month or mead month, and that was your month of celebrating after you got married. So you would have drank honey mead as a celebration. So that's a little bit. And again, you would have gotten fields ready and things like that while you were doing that. But mostly, getting fields ready means getting all the infrastructure set back up again after the long winters, which just, breaks things down, ruins things, ruins your fences, whatever, fixing your barn, finally getting out in the summer. Another thing is that animals begin to be fertile again, so if you want to, breed any of your animals, spring is when you want to do it. Also, again, like I said, shearing sheep, right, and shearing goats if you have them, or if you want to shear them. That's when you would do it, is in the spring. So again, spring as a new year, at least if you're living and working on the farm. Oh, there we go. We went on a big loop. That's where the baseball field is back there. We're going to pass right by it. So anyway, if you live in a sort of farming society, right, spring is really where your year kind of begins, because once you get to October, your year's kind of done, or November even, your year's kind of done, and spring is when you kind of start over again, right? So January as a beginning point doesn't really make sense, except maybe on a calendar. There's really no reason why it's a new year. It's not the beginning of a new cycle, at least in the farm. So yeah, for your pre-industrial societies, March is sort of the beginning point. You start your work over again, you start planting, you start fixing things, you get ready for all of that, and you sort of begin anew. You begin sort of a new cycle for the year. So again, Happy New Year, everyone, and happy spring.